I think millions of people have tapped buy in an ebook store and just assumed they were buying a book. Legally, most of the time, they weren't. What they were actually buying was permission. Permission to read a file on approved software through an account inside somebody else's system. That's not the way that people think about buying books, but it is much closer to what's actually being sold. Hey folks, welcome back to the Weekly Spark. Now, this conversation actually started with my previous video about older Kindles losing support, but judging by the many comments on that video, it's led to a much bigger question about ebooks, ownership, and what you've really paid for. So all this kicked off because Amazon announced that Kindle e-readers from 2012 or earlier are losing support from the 20th of May 2026. Now, if those devices already have books downloaded and you keep them registered, those books will still open. So it's not like everything suddenly disappears overnight. But you won't be able to buy anything new, borrow anything new, or download anything new directly onto them. And if you deregister one or factory reset it, that's it. You can't sign back in again. That's not the same as losing your Amazon account, but it's a pretty clear reminder that your access to digital stuff depends on more than just the device in your hand. Because when you buy a paperback, it's dead simple. You get a physical object, you stick it on a bookshelf, you lend it to a mate, you sell it, you forget about it for 15 years and find it in a box in the loft and it still works. Well, that's because it's an actual book. And that instinct carries over to ebooks. You tap buy, it shows up in your library, and everything about that experience feels like ownership. But if you actually look at the terms and conditions for that online store, it's not the same thing. Amazon says Kindle content is licensed, not sold. Apple says each purchase gives you a license. Kobo says the same. Google gives you a non-exclusive right to use and display the content. And Barnes & Noble's Nook, let's not forget about this one, calls it a limited, non-exclusive, revocable license. So, across the board, the terms are broadly saying the same thing. You're not buying ownership in the old-fashioned sense. You're buying licensed access. When you buy an ebook, you're usually not getting a file and being left to do with it what you will. You're getting access tied to your account, a file that might be locked or encrypted, a device or app that's authorized to open it, and a service that handles syncing and downloads. And sometimes the first thing you download isn't even the book. On platforms like Kobo, you often start with something called an ACSM file. That's not the book. It's basically a license file. Software like Adobe Digital Editions reads that file, checks you're allowed to access it, and then downloads the actual EPUB or PDF. Google uses a similar system for a lot of its protected downloads as well. So, in plain English, sometimes you're not even downloading a book, you're downloading permission to go and get the book. And I think that will probably surprise a lot of people. Now, to paraphrase a line from my previous video, to be fair, this isn't just a case of Amazon bad, everyone else good. Every major platform is still built on the same basic idea. You're getting licensed access, not old school ownership. However, some platforms are clearly more flexible than others, even though they're still often locked down with DRM, and that stands for Digital Rights Management, which is a way of stopping an ebook or other digital product from being freely copied and shared for nothing. So, Although the underlying model is broadly the same, the level of control and flexibility does vary from platform to platform. Kobo is more flexible in some ways. It lets you download a lot of your purchases as EPUB or PDF and move them around. But most of those are still protected, usually through Adobe Digital Editions, and its terms still allow for access to be restricted or accounts to be suspended in certain situations. So yes, it's more open, but it's not the same as owning a paperback. Google is also more open than most people realize. A lot of books can be exported. Some are completely DRM free, and Google even says that if it has to remove a title, anything you've already downloaded should keep working. But even there, what you're given is still a non-exclusive right to use the content tied to your account and their systems. It's still access, not ownership in the traditional sense. Apple is probably the clearest of the lot when it comes to its terms and conditions. It's pretty clear in telling you that this is a license-only system and that your access depends on its hardware, its software, and its services. Apple even tells users to download and back things up because purchased content might not always be available later. And remember, I said this isn't always an Amazon bad story. Amazon has, in recent times, made one small move in the other direction. For some DRM-free self-published Kindle books, verified buyers can now download EPUB or PDF files, which means in those cases you can actually do a lot more with the file. That's new. That's a real shift. But it's still very much the exception, not the rule. This is also why used ebooks never really became a thing. With a physical book, once you've bought it, you can sell it on, no problem. With digital files, the law has generally gone the other way. In the US, there was a case called Redigi, where a company tried to build a resale market for digital music files people had bought online, and the courts basically shut that down. In Europe, the Tom Cabinet case looked at second-hand ebooks and came to a similar conclusion. Ebooks don't get treated like worn-out physical copies you can just pass on. So legally, everything keeps pointing in the same way. Digital books behave less like property, more like controlled access. And none of this is just theory. Back in 2009, Amazon remotely removed copies of 1984 and Animal Farm by George Orwell from some Kindle devices, and the irony of big tech controlling what most people own is not lost on me here. Anyway, Amazon later settled a mass action lawsuit brought by Kindle users, but that's not really the point. The point is that it showed the company could reach into a device and remove something people thought they had bought. And then you've got Microsoft, which shut down its ebook store in 2019 and refunded customers because once the service closed, access to those books went with it. Different company, same lesson. That library can feel like ownership, but it's really just access tied to a service. The real issue here is expectation. Ebooks are convenient. Search within them is convenient. Syncing across multiple cross-platform devices is convenient. Carrying 1,000 books around in your pocket is said to be the epitome of convenience. But convenience and ownership are not the same thing. However, for most of the time, that trade-off feels perfectly acceptable, as long as nothing breaks, nothing disappears, and everything ticks along as expected. But The moment a device drops out of support, or a service changes something, or a title vanishes, or an account goes sideways, that difference between a bookshelf and a license suddenly becomes very real. So when you tap buy on an ebook, what are you actually getting? Well, hopefully you'll understand by now that most of the time it's a license. Not always the same terms, not always the same restrictions, and not always DRM, but almost never ownership in that old school chuck it on a bookshelf sense. And that doesn't mean don't buy ebooks, it just means understand the trade-off. If permanence really matters to you, then print still wins. If flexibility matters, DRM-free and export-friendly options are there, you just have to go looking for them. And if convenience is what you want, fine, just call it what it is. It's convenience inside a system. And that's the bit most people are never really told and only really notice when something stops working. Okay, that's all folks. If you've spotted any Kindle, e-ink, iPad or related tech stories you think are worth talking about, do let me know in the comments. As always, a like would be lovely, and subscribing means you won't miss the next episode. I'm trying to hit 500 subscribers on this new channel by summer, so if you could play your part, that would be awesome and appreciated. And if you'd like to support the channel a little further, you can buy me a digital coffee using the QR code that's been on the screen throughout this video, or use the link in the description. And if you'd like to watch that previous video about Amazon culling older Kindles, you'll find that here. Anyway, thanks for watching or listening. I'm Mark from the Weekly Spark, and I'll see you in the next one.